From the smoke came Terran Marine's first document. The alarm shrieked through the crystalline corridors of Station Veltar like the dying breath of a wounded beast. Commander Zixtela's 4 eyes dilated in perfect synchronization as she watched the tactical display paint a picture of absolute terror across her bridge's main screen. 27 red dots approached their position, each one representing a human warship bristling with weapons that defied every principle of civilized warfare. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. The Velkhari Empire had conquered 47 star systems without losing a single major engagement. Their energy shields were impenetrable, their plasma cannons could crack planets, and their warrior caste had never retreated from battle. Sub-Commander Clethoner's tentacles trembled as he manipulated his console. The human fleet maintained standard approach vector. No deviation from predicted course. They refuse all communication attempts and continue broadcasting that same primitive message. The message had been playing on repeat for the past 3 hours. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. You have committed acts of aggression against human colonies. Surrender immediately or face the consequences." Zixtela's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Consequences? These mammals dare threaten the might of Velkhar?" She gestured toward the viewport where their defensive fleet hung in perfect formation. 150 ships, each one a masterpiece of Velkhari engineering. "They bring 27 vessels against our armada. Either they are incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." The tactical officer, a young Velkhari named Sithara, looked up from her station. "Commander, our intelligence reports suggest these humans are relatively new to space warfare. They've only been actively expanding for about 2 centuries. Their technology appears primitive by our standards." "Appears being the operative term," Clethanor interjected nervously. "We have no combat data on human vessels. The raids on their outer colonies were conducted by mercenary forces." Zixtela waved a dismissive claw. "Mercenaries who reported soft targets with minimal defenses. These humans learn to fear us through those attacks, yet they still come. Perhaps they seek honorable death rather than slow extinction." She turned to face her bridge crew, all of whom had served with distinction in previous campaigns. "Today we add another species to our empire's glorious history. Begin the attack." The Velkhari fleet surged forward with practiced precision. Their formation had been perfected over centuries of conquest. Heavy battleships formed the center while fast assault cruisers swept wide to envelop any attempting retreat. Energy weapons charged to full power, painting space with an ominous violet glow that had been the last thing many alien civilizations had ever seen. But something was wrong. The human ships weren't behaving like any enemy the Velkhari had ever faced. Instead of maintaining defensive positions or attempting evasive maneuvers, they continued their steady advance directly into the Velkhari formation. No tactical adjustments, no clever positioning, just a relentless forward momentum that spoke of either supreme confidence or suicidal determination. "Range in 30 seconds, announced the weapons officer. "All plasma batteries ready to fire on your command, Commander." Zixtela studied the approaching human vessels through the bridge's enhanced sensors. The ships themselves were strange, angular where Velkhari vessels were curved, brutal where alien designs typically emphasized elegance. They looked like weapons rather than spacecraft, built for a single purpose with no consideration for aesthetics or comfort. 20 seconds to optimal firing range, the weapons officer called out. "Something's not right," Clethanor whispered, his tentacles dancing nervously across his console. "Their approach vector hasn't changed even slightly. It's as if they want us to fire first." "Of course they do," Zixtela replied with confidence. "They hope to absorb our first volley and prove their shields can withstand Velkhari plasma. It's a desperate psychological tactic. 10 seconds to range." Zixtela raised her primary claw. "All batteries, prepare to fire on my mark." The human fleet suddenly changed. Not their course or speed, but something else entirely. Ports opened along their hulls, thousands upon thousands of tiny apertures that began venting atmosphere into space. But this wasn't damage or decompression. The escaping gases ignited, creating vast clouds of roiling smoke and flame that engulfed each human vessel. "What are they doing?" Cythara asked, her voice tight with confusion, through her tactical display. Zixtela watched as the human ships disappeared into their self-created inferno. Sensors couldn't penetrate the superheated clouds, making targeting impossible. But more disturbing than the loss of sensor lock was the psychological impact. The human fleet had transformed from 27 distinct vessels into 27 rolling storm clouds of fire and smoke, advancing through space like harbingers of some primordial apocalypse. "Commander," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving a new transmission from the human fleet." "Put it through." A human voice filled the bridge, speaking in heavily accented Valkyrie standard. But it wasn't Admiral Chun this time. This voice was rougher, younger, filled with barely contained aggression. "Valkyrie forces, this is Gunnery Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, 3rd Battalion, Terran Colonial Marines. We're coming through that smoke and we're bringing hell with us. Semper Fi, you alien bastards." The transmission cut to static. Zixtela felt something she had never experienced before: uncertainty. In all their previous conquests, enemy forces had behaved predictably. They defended their positions, attempted tactical maneuvers, or fled when faced with overwhelming force. But these humans seemed to operate under entirely different principles. "Fire!" she commanded. Desperate to reassert control over the situation, the Valkyrie fleet unleashed its opening volley, hundreds of plasma bolts, streaking through space toward the smoke-shrouded human vessels. The energy beams disappeared into the roiling clouds without any visible effect. No explosions, no debris, no indication that they had struck anything at all. "No hits registered," the weapons officer reported in disbelief. "Sensors cannot confirm target destruction." "Impossible," Zixtela snarled. "Those clouds cannot stop plasma fire." But even as she spoke, the human response began. Not energy weapons or missiles, but something far more primitive and infinitely more terrifying. Projectiles began streaking out of the smoke clouds, physical rounds traveling at relativistic speeds. Their metal cores heated to incandescence by atmospheric friction. The first Valkyrie cruiser to be hit simply ceased to exist. One moment it was a proud vessel of the Imperial fleet. The next it was an expanding sphere of vaporized metal and superheated plasma. The projectile had punched through shields, armor, and hull as if they were made of paper. "Report?" Zixtela demanded as more of her ships began disappearing under the human barrage. "Kinetic weapons," Cythara shouted over the chaos erupting across the bridge. "They're using solid projectiles accelerated to near-light speed. Our shields are designed to deflect energy attacks, not physical matter moving at those velocities." Another cruiser exploded, then a destroyer, then one of their heavy battleships. Each hit was perfectly placed, each shot finding critical systems with surgical precision. But worse than the destruction was the realization of what it meant. The humans hadn't been advancing blindly. They had been studying the Valkyrie formation, identifying weak points and targeting priorities while hidden in their smoke clouds. "Evasive maneuvers," Zixtela ordered. "All ships break formation and engage evasive protocols." But it was too late for evasive action. The human fleet burst from their smoke screens like ancient demons emerging from the underworld. Their ships showed no damage from the Valkyrie plasma barrage. The superheated clouds had absorbed and dispersed the energy attacks while providing perfect concealment for their approach. Now Zixtela could see the human vessels clearly for the first time, and what she saw defied everything she knew about space warfare. These weren't sleek ships of exploration or even traditional warships. They were fortresses, flying battlements covered in armor, plating, and bristling with weapons of every conceivable type. Gunports lined their hulls like the eyes of some impossible beast, and from each one came a steady stream of projectiles that turned space into a killing field. "Commander," Clethoner called out, his voice breaking with panic, "I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the human ships. They're powering up additional weapon systems." The lead human vessel, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed even the largest Valkyrie battleship, began to glow with an ominous blue light. Along its dorsal surface, massive railgun batteries were charging up, their magnetic coils building enough power to accelerate projectiles to speeds that would make their previous barrage look like a gentle rain. "All ships, full retreat," Zixthala ordered. "Fall back to the inner defense perimeter." But the humans weren't finished with their surprises. As the Valkyrie fleet began its retreat, smaller craft began launching from the human ships. These weren't fighters or bombers, but something else entirely, assault pods designed to punch through enemy hulls and deliver their cargo directly into hostile vessels. "They're launching boarding craft," Suthara reported. From the smoke came Terran Marines, second document 3 days after the initial engagement. Commander Zixthala stood in the ruins of what had once been the pride of Valkyrie military architecture. Station Veltar, a fortress that had never fallen in 3 centuries of warfare, now bore the scars of human occupation like open wounds across its crystalline structure. The elegant spires that had reached toward distant stars lay broken, replaced by crude but effective human defensive positions that turned every corridor into a potential killing field. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic warfare. They had not simply conquered the station, they had transformed it. Where Valkyrie technology emphasized elegance and efficiency, human modifications were purely functional. Blast barriers had been welded into place at strategic choke points. Weapon emplacements appeared at every intersection, and the very atmosphere had been altered to suit human physiology rather than the dozen alien species that had previously called the station home. "Status report," Zixthala demanded. Though she already knew the answer would bring no comfort, Sub-Commander. Clethonor's tentacles hung limp with exhaustion. "The outer 3 levels have been completely secured by human forces. They've established what they call fire-based positions at all major intersections. Our counterattacks have been—" He paused, searching for words that would not sound like defeatism. "Unsuccessful." Unsuccessful was a profound understatement. In 72 hours of continuous fighting, Valkyrie forces had managed to retake exactly 0 strategic positions from the human Marines. Every corridor assault had been met with withering crossfire from soldiers who seemed to anticipate every tactical move. Every attempt at flanking maneuvers had run into prepared positions that shouldn't have existed. The humans fought as if they had been studying Valkyrie military doctrine for decades rather than encountering it for the first time. "How many casualties?" Zixthala asked, though she dreaded the answer. 2,347 confirmed dead, Clethonor replied. Another 800 wounded, seriously enough to be removed from combat. The humans ... He hesitated. "Speak freely, Sub-Commander." "The humans have lost 11 soldiers." The number hit Zixthala like a physical blow. In 3 days of intense urban warfare, the humans had sustained casualties that wouldn't normally account for rounding errors in Valkyrie battle reports. It defied every principle of military science she had ever learned. "That's impossible," she said. "No force can maintain those casualty ratios without superior numbers, superior technology, or superior positioning. The humans have none of those advantages." But even as she spoke, Zixthala knew she was wrong. The humans did possess advantages, just not ones that appeared in any military textbook. They fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness, a tactical flexibility that confounded traditional responses, and an apparent immunity to the psychological pressures that broke other species. "Commander," came a new voice from the communications station. "We're receiving a transmission from the human commander." "Put it through." The voice that filled the command center was calm, professional, and utterly without mercy. "Commander Zixthala, this is Colonel James Harrison, 3rd Battalion, Terran Colonial Marines. I'm calling to inform you that we've secured the station's primary reactor and life support systems. You have 2 options: surrender unconditionally, or we turn off the gravity and atmosphere and settle this in hard vacuum. You've got 15 minutes to decide." The transmission ended. Zixthala stared at the communications console in disbelief. "They're bluffing." No military force would risk destroying a strategic asset of this value. Commander, the sensor operator called out, I'm detecting human activity in the reactor control room. They appear to be installing some kind of device. On the main screen, security footage from the reactor level showed human Marines working with practiced efficiency around the station's power core. They moved with the confidence of soldiers who had performed similar operations countless times before. But what chilled Zixtela's blood was the realization that they weren't installing weapons or explosives. They were installing control systems, devices that would give them complete authority over every function of the station. They're not threatening to destroy it, she whispered. They're taking it. The truth was becoming clear with each passing moment. The humans hadn't come to defeat Valkyrie forces and withdraw. They hadn't come to negotiate a treaty or establish a buffer zone. They had come to stay. Every action they had taken suggested a long-term occupation strategy rather than a temporary military operation. Sub-Commander, what do we know about human military doctrine? Zixtela asked. Clethonar manipulated his console, calling up what little intelligence they had gathered. Very limited data, Commander. The mercenary forces that raided human colonies reported standard defensive tactics, fixed positions, energy weapons, conventional spacecraft. Nothing that would suggest the capabilities we've encountered. Then we've been deliberately fed false information, Zixtela concluded. Those raids weren't random attacks. They were reconnaissance missions designed to make us underestimate human military capability. The implications were staggering. If the humans had deliberately allowed their outer colonies to be attacked in order to lure Valkyrie forces into a larger engagement, it suggested a level of strategic thinking that few species possessed. More disturbing, it suggested they were willing to sacrifice their own people as part of a larger military deception. Commander, the communications officer interrupted, we're receiving multiple transmissions from the human forces. They appear to be coordinating with additional units throughout the station. Additional units? Zixtela felt her certainty crumbling further. How many soldiers did they land? Initial sensor readings suggested approximately 300 Marines, Sifara reported. But current audio intercepts suggest much larger numbers. Either our initial counts were wildly inaccurate or what? Or they've been receiving reinforcements through methods our sensors cannot detect. Zixtela moved to the tactical display showing the station's internal structure. Human positions were marked in red, and the pattern that emerged was both impressive and terrifying. In just 3 days, the Marines had established a network of mutually supporting strongpoints that turned the station's own architecture against its defenders. Every major corridor was covered by overlapping fields of fire. Every important system was either controlled or within easy striking distance of human forces. How are they resupplying? She demanded. We control the docking bays. We have sensors monitoring all external approaches. Unknown, Commander, Clethonar admitted. Human forces appear to have unlimited ammunition and supplies, but we cannot identify their supply routes. The answer came in the form of an explosion that shook the entire command center. Emergency lights activated as the main power grid fluctuated, and damage reports began flooding in from across the station. Report, Zixtela ordered. Massive detonation in Section C7, the damage control officer called out. It appears the humans have breached the outer hull and are establishing some kind of external facility. The main screen switched to external cameras, and Zixtela watched in amazement as human spacecraft approached the breach. But these weren't military vessels, they were construction ships, mobile factories, and what appeared to be prefabricated base modules. The humans weren't just establishing a beachhead. They were building a permanent installation. They're not planning to leave, she said quietly. Commander? Clethonar asked. They're not planning to leave, she repeated, louder this time. This isn't a raid or even an invasion. It's a colonization effort. They intend to permanently occupy this system. As if summoned by her words, Colonel Harrison's voice filled the command center again. Commander Zixtela, your 15 minutes are up. What's your decision? Zixthala looked around her command center at the faces of soldiers who had never known defeat, officers who had conquered star systems and subjugated entire species. Now they looked back at her with expressions she had never seen before: doubt, fear, and the dawning recognition that they were facing something beyond their experience. "Colonel Harrison," she replied, "I require additional time to consult with my staff." "Negative, Commander. You've had 72 hours to consult with your staff. The clock's ticking. Surrender now, or we resolve this the hard way." The transmission cut off, but within seconds every light in the command center went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an ominous red glow that made every shadow seem like a potential threat. "They've, taken control of our power grid?" the engineering officer reported unnecessarily. Zixthala realized that the humans had been playing a completely different game from the beginning. While Valkyrie forces focused on traditional military objectives, controlling key positions, eliminating enemy forces, maintaining supply lines, the humans had been systematically seizing infrastructure. They hadn't just invaded the station. They had quietly assumed control of its basic functions. "All stations, this is command," she announced over the internal communications system. "Report status of all critical systems." The responses painted a picture of complete human dominance. Life support systems were operating, but from the smoke came Terran Marines, third document 6 months after the fall of Station Veltar. Former Commander Zixthala stood in what had once been her private quarters, now converted into an observation deck overlooking the most remarkable transformation she had ever witnessed. The station that had once been the crown jewel of Valkyrie military architecture now served as the hub of human expansion into this sector of the galaxy. And the changes went far beyond mere military occupation. The humans hadn't simply conquered and held territory, they had transformed it into something entirely new. Where Valkyrie engineering had emphasized ethereal beauty and artistic expression, human modifications focused on pure functionality and staggering efficiency. The station now bristled with defensive installations, manufacturing facilities, and what appeared to be experimental research laboratories that operated around the clock. "Former Commander Zixthala," came a voice behind her. She turned to see Colonel Harrison approaching, no longer wearing the combat armor she had become accustomed to seeing during the occupation's early days. Instead, he wore a simple duty uniform that somehow made him appear more dangerous rather than less. "Colonel Harrison," she replied with a respectful nod. "I was not expecting a personal visit." "I wanted to discuss something with you," Harrison said, moving to stand beside her at the observation window. "My superiors have been impressed with your cooperation during the transition period. Your people have adapted to human authority better than expected." Zixthala considered this carefully. "Colonel, may I speak freely?" "Always. My people adapt because we recognize superior force when we encounter it. But more than that, we've come to understand that resistance would be not just futile, but counterproductive. The humans aren't simply conquerors. You're builders." Harrison smiled, an expression that had taken Zixthala weeks to properly interpret. "That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. We have a proposition." Through the observation window, Zixthala could see the latest addition to the station's expanding structure, a massive construction platform that appeared to be building something unprecedented. The framework was already larger than most space stations, but according to human engineers, it was only the beginning phase of whatever they were creating. "What kind of proposition?" she asked. "Integration," Harrison replied simply. "Not subjugation, not forced compliance, but actual integration. We want to offer selected Valkyrie personnel positions in our military structure." Zixthala felt her mandibles click in surprise. "You want to recruit my soldiers?" "We want to recruit you," Harrison clarified. "And through you, the best of your people. Here's the thing, Commander, and I'm still going to call you Commander because that's what you are. Your tactical knowledge and experience are valuable assets. We'd be foolish not to utilize them." "I don't understand," Zixthala admitted. "Why would you trust former enemies with positions of authority in your military?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, watching the construction activity beyond the window. Because 6 months ago, when you could have ordered your people to fight to the death and taken a lot of Marines with you, you chose to surrender to save their lives. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The observation deck's silence was broken by the arrival of another figure, Admiral Sarah Chun, the human officer whose ultimatum had started this entire chain of events. Zixtela had met her several times during the transition period and found her to be every bit as formidable as her reputation suggested. Admiral Chun? Zixtela acknowledged with a formal bow. Commander, Chun replied. I hope Colonel Harrison has been explaining our proposal clearly. He has, Admiral, but I must ask, why now? Why offer integration rather than simply maintaining occupation forces? Chin moved to the observation window and gestured toward the construction platform. Because of that. Do you know what we're building out there? Some kind of shipyard facility, I assumed. It's going to be the largest mobile construction platform in known space, Chun explained. Capable of building dreadnought-class vessels in half the time of any existing facility. And it's just the first of 12 such platforms we plan to construct in this sector. Zixtela felt a chill run through her exoskeleton. 12? Admiral, a single platform of that size could outproduce the entire Valkyrie shipbuilding industry. 12 would represent naval construction capacity beyond anything the galaxy has ever seen. Exactly, Chun replied. And here's the thing, we're not building this fleet to conquer more territory. We're building it because our intelligence suggests there are threats in deep space that make our current conflicts look like playground disputes. Harrison activated a holographic display that showed star charts extending far beyond the boundaries of known civilized space. Long-range survey missions have detected energy signatures and artificial structures in regions where no known species has ever traveled. Whatever built them has technology that makes both human and Valkyrie capabilities look primitive. Ancient aliens? Zixtela asked, her scientific training overriding military concerns. Unknown, Chun replied. But the preliminary data suggests they're not ancient at all. The energy signatures are consistent with active technology. Someone or something is out there, and based on the scale of what we've detected, they represent a potential threat to every civilized species in the galaxy. Zixtela studied the star charts, her tactical mind automatically analyzing the implications. You're preparing for a war against an unknown enemy. We're preparing to defend civilization, Harrison corrected. And that's going to require resources, expertise, and cooperation on a scale that no single species can provide. We need allies, not subjects. The full scope of the human proposition was beginning to become clear. They weren't offering integration as a reward for good behavior or as a cynical attempt to exploit Valkyrie knowledge. They were offering it because they genuinely believed they would need every advantage they could get in whatever conflict was coming. What exactly are you proposing? Zixtela asked. Admiral Chun activated another section of the holographic display, showing organizational charts and fleet structures. We're establishing what we're calling the Terran Colonial Defense Alliance. Human forces will form the core, but we want to incorporate the best elements from every species we encounter. Valkyrie tactical expertise, Zephyrian sensor technology, Altarian engineering capabilities, whatever strengths each civilization can contribute. And in exchange? Full partnership, Harrison replied. Not membership, not association, but actual partnership. Shared technology, shared resources, shared command authority where appropriate. Zixtela looked from one human officer to the other, trying to process what she was hearing. You're asking me to help you build a military alliance against an unknown threat, using my people's expertise to strengthen forces that defeated us. We're asking you to help us build something that can protect everyone, Chun corrected, including your people. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from Harrison's communication device. Excuse me, he said, activating the device. Harrison here. Colonel, this is Captain Martinez in Intelligence. We've just received a priority transmission from deep space monitoring stations. You need to see this immediately. On our way, Harrison replied. He looked at Zixtela and Chun. This might be relevant to our discussion. They made their way to the Intelligence Center, a facility that hadn't existed during Valkyrie occupation, but now represented one of the station's most heavily secured areas. Captain Martinez, a young human officer with the intense focus typical of intelligence specialists, was waiting with a holographic display showing what appeared to be sensor readings from the edge of explored space. Report? Captain, Chun ordered. Admiral, our deep space monitoring network detected this transmission approximately 18 hours ago. It's clearly artificial in origin, but unlike anything in our databases, the holographic display showed a complex waveform pattern that pulsed with mathematical precision. But what made Zixtela's blood run cold was the realization that she recognized elements of the pattern. Captain Martinez, she said quietly, may I examine those readings more closely? Harrison nodded to the captain, who adjusted the display to provide more detailed information. Zixtela studied the data for several minutes before speaking. Admiral Chun, Colonel Harrison, I believe I may have seen something similar to this before. Where? Chun asked immediately. In the archives of our most ancient texts, Zixtela replied. Stories that our historians always assumed were mythology rather than historical records. Tales of the darkness between stars that supposedly existed before current galactic civilization arose. What kind of tales? Harrison pressed. Wars that consumed entire sectors. Civilizations that simply vanished overnight, leaving no trace except empty worlds and dead space. Our mythologies speak of enemies that could not be reasoned with, could not be defeated through conventional warfare, and could not be escaped through retreat. Captain Martinez pulled up additional sensor data. Ma'am, if these readings are accurate, whatever sent this transmission has energy output comparable to an entire star system. That's not just advanced technology, that's technology on a scale we can barely comprehend.